All right. So it feels like these extreme weather related stories have just been piling up on top of each other in rapid succession, obviously, as the impacts of climate change are continuing to worsen and as we continue to do nowhere close to enough in order to try to transition away from a dirty fossil fuel based economy and towards a renewable one. And we just were talking about the Maui fires over in Hawaii, and now over the last day or so, there has been a massive tropical storm that just slammed into California, which is a place that is not really supposed to get storms like this, like at all. Like, this is the first one of this severity to hit this state in close to, I think, 100 years at this point. So some basic information on this, and it was also not just the tropical storm. There was also sort of like a very unlucky wombo combo that they got hit with. In addition to the storm, there was also an earthquake, a magnitude like 5 earthquake, which they say, I guess, is like sort of middle of the road, not too extreme, but also could have some significant effects from it as well, that hit at the same exact time. But here's some more information just on the flooding and the storm itself. They say here from Axios, the big picture: it's rare for a tropical storm to hit the region. The storm is bringing the likelihood of catastrophic and life-threatening flooding to parts of the U.S. Southwest through Monday, while prompting unprecedented tropical storm warnings for L.A. and San Diego. They say the threat level: the storm brought 2 years or more worth of rain in California's desert areas. 2 years in one day. And now a post-tropical storm swirling through Nevada, it produced tropical rainfall rates, which can be torrential to areas that rarely, if ever, have experienced them. And they continue down here showing a little bit of the maps in terms of where the heaviest rainfall was located. And they also have an interesting map here in terms of the sort of like density of this precipitation. And it seems like, again, it was located mostly, it hit Mexico pretty hard actually, but located mostly in Southern California and then Southwest Nevada as well. And I mean, we're talking about, as I point out here, tens of millions of people who have been impacted by this. And of course, they tied in here at the end to climate change, saying that human-caused climate change is leading to more frequent and intense extreme precipitation events. It is also causing tropical storms and hurricanes to produce more rainfall as a warmer atmosphere and oceans allow these storms to carry more moisture. And I mean, keep in mind, I was just talking about a couple weeks ago, we had ocean temperatures. Now, granted, this was the Atlantic Ocean, but like off the coast of Florida, that were basically just hot tub temperatures. They were like over 100 degrees in the ocean. I mean, just completely insane stories, right? There was the other stories that were coming out of Phoenix, Arizona, where people were literally just falling down on the pavement, and then their ICUs were filling up because people were getting burned just by falling on the ground, right? And then also in Phoenix, you had like, an entire month straight within the month of July where they were averaging over 100 degrees, Fahrenheit, which again is like borderline unlivable for human beings, okay? We're talking about millions of people that are being impacted by this, obviously not just in the United States, but around the rest of the world as well. And, mostly it's going to be poorer countries internationally, or, poorer communities within the United States that are going to be facing the brunt of a lot of the consequences of climate change, which, as a reminder, is being driven essentially by like 100 corporations around the world right now, and obviously the underlying capitalist forces that are at work in as a part of that equation as well. But just to give you some more imagery here in terms of what this looked like on the ground, we got like fallen trees. I saw a video of cars that were on this highway stretch that had obviously gathered a little bit of water, and cars were just plowing straight through it and then spinning out, and there was a row of like 15 cars that had crashed on the road. Obviously, bridges and roads being destroyed as well. Cars still trying to get through it. People being impacted by this. I mean, that just looks absolutely insane right there. We had some mudslides and other things that they were pointing out in that previous article, and some seriously intense flooding as well. As pointed out here by the Sunrise Movement, they say, be fucking for real. This is a climate emergency. They are 100% correct. I mean, just look at that flooding. And I actually scrolled down here. I made the mistake of looking at some replies on x.com, or formerly known as Twitter. And I mean, these are some of the responses to this tweet. I mean, we're talking about, look at this video here, right? And the responses here are, hi, that appears to be weather. Okay, another one. It's actually called a flood. They happen all the time, right? AKA a flood in a country with poor drainage standards. We might have poor drainage standards, but that doesn't change the fact that this is an unprecedented historical storm that we're seeing, and that we're seeing these, what are supposed to be like once in a century storms, what seems like on a weekly basis at this point, right? That is not actually normal. It is not actually just the weather, as they're pointing out here. So these were just some, dickhead idiots on Twitter, but I'm going to show you a couple other examples here just in a second of some, senators and, high level media personalities who are also doing the same thing as these people are doing here. But there was also one other thing that I just wanted to point out, that apparently they're also tracking some pretty significant like early stages of storm formations in the Atlantic as well that could be heading towards the Gulf of Mexico. So that's also going to be something to be watching out for. And I mean, we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these stacked up in a row, going all the way from the western coast of Africa over here towards Cuba and Haiti, and then going on to Texas there. So that's going to be another thing we got to keep our eye on. And now we get to the sort of, I guess, media literacy aspect of this video that I wanted to cover, and also just the general way that media covers this kind of an issue, right? Because if you notice, whenever I cover some serious event like this, right, usually, or I would say probably 100% of the time, I'm tying it directly to climate change, right? Man-made, anthropogenic climate change that should be the main focus of this conversation, because these things are not just like one-off events. They're not just like something that comes and goes as a normal part of how the world is going to work. No, it's not sustainable, the direction, the trajectory that we are heading in, and that is because of the effects of climate change, which are just going to continue to get worse and worse over time the longer that we put off any real meaningful structural reforms and actions in order to change the way that we are consuming and using energy around the world, while we're destroying the planet, right, and making it borderline unlivable for ourselves and for the future of humanity. And so that's where I like to focus most of the conversation usually when I'm talking about this. Other people have some different strategies, right? So I just want to start off here with Ted Cruz, who's just giving a little reaction here to a picture of a fucking shark on a highway. And believe it or not, this is not actually from the most recent flooding in California. Just complete lie, a complete fabrication here from the Twitter account Big Cat, who I guess works for Barstool Sports, I guess. Big Cat spreading some, good old misinformation out there. Ted Cruz buying it hook, line, and sinker. And apparently we don't even know like where the original origins of this photo actually is. Apparently it's just a digital hoax, right? It was used in 2011, 2015, 2016, and we have, of course, one of the top 100 most powerful people in the country, a U.S. senator from the state of Texas, Ted Cruz, who is just falling for that. Now, I guess he went on to admit that it was, bullshit. But, these kinds of things were floating all around Twitter. And it was getting to the point where it was like, obviously, a lot of these are jokes. I don't know if this guy, Big Cat, was joking about this specific one. It doesn't really seem like he was, but I've seen other people who are posting like videos from Disneyland in California where they have some ride that I guess is supposed to like simulate a flood within LA, and it's like showing Hollywood, and then water flushes in and everybody screams, and the kids on the ride and everything like that. And we had like actual journalists who work for like real official established news outlets who were like responding to those posts on Twitter, and they were being like, can we use this for our news report? Like, this is crazy. This looks insane. I mean, it's just like people are obviously like taking the piss to a large extent. But again, we have some, journalists, and we also have senators who are just like, eating this up, right? And then we also have the flip side of that, which is how, networks like Fox News choose to frame these things. There was this one which kind of blew my mind, but they essentially decided to, I guess, blame Joe Biden for this hurricane or tropical storm hitting landfall. So let's listen to this one here.
Big story tonight. The wrath of Tropical Storm Hillary. 42 million desperate souls in the path of the storm, which made landfall in Mexico several hours ago. But they let it right into the country because it's Biden's America. Its impact far from over. This is the first tropical storm to hit California.
Okay, so what? Like, I guess that was kind of like a joke in some way, but what was the voice that you were doing? Why were you using that kind of like, tone and inflection in your voice when you were delivering that? I mean, this is a hurricane. We're talking about a tropical storm that could potentially kill a bunch of people, cause billions of dollars in, property damage and things like that. And you're just sort of like, flippantly discussing this thing. But then on top of that, blaming it on Joe Biden and, saying, I guess, some sort of like an implication on his open border policy, and saying, I guess, trying to say that because it hit Mexico and then it went on to California, that this is because of Joe Biden's open border policy or something like that. I mean, like, what the fuck is going on, right? And we also had another recent one that I didn't get to cover on this channel, but I mean, this is just another example in terms of how Fox News, now keep in mind, I mean, Fox News is bankrolled by, fossil fuel ghouls and titans and, millionaires and billionaires and, advertisers who want them to, head in this direction as well. And this is also just part of their broad, ideological project on the right and, amongst conservatives. But I mean, this is just another example here from Jesse Waters, right? Fox News' Jesse Waters says climate change is a psyop to raise taxes and make people anxious. When someone is that anxious, they'll do anything to solve the problem. I mean, okay, first of all, coming from, an outlet like Fox News that is basically just 24/7, rage bait to try to get people freaked out and hysterical and angry about something. I mean, this is the network that was running segments about how M&Ms aren't sexy enough anymore, right? Okay, and now they're turning around and saying, oh, climate change, which is like legitimately a threat to the human, civilization that we have built up, right? Now they're looking at that issue and saying, oh, well, if you're worried about climate change, that's actually the psyop, right? It's not a psyop when an entire network is geared towards promoting the interests of fossil fuels, right? And they also have financial ties and an interest in promoting, those same corporations that are, reliant on fossil fuels for their profits, right? That's not the psyop. The psyop isn't that we have corrupt political leaders and a corrupt media ecosystem that is perpetuating the usage of fossil fuels to the detriment of the human species just to protect their profits. That's not the psyop. The psyop is people who are worried about climate change, I guess. I mean, again, this is our media, right? This is one of the most popular outlets in the country. And I've seen, this track with some polling data. There was some crazy poll that came out recently a couple weeks ago that was basically saying it's close to a majority. I mean, it was like 40% of the country thinks that we don't need to do anything about climate change right now, like in an immediate sense. They think, oh, maybe at some point, well, we got to do something, or maybe it'll figure itself out. But like people just have no legitimate scope in terms of the urgency of what the urgency and the scale of what kind of action is actually required, according to what the scientists are saying that we need to do to prevent, more situations like this. And just in a broad scopes way, right? Not just Fox News, because it's also CNN, it's also MSNBC. It's a broad media failure on this issue of climate change. But as pointed out here by Media Matters, they say only 4% of national TV news segments about the catastrophic wildfires in Hawaii mentioned climate change. 4%. You're talking about wildfires, okay, that were explicitly made worse. You can't say, okay, maybe it was instigated just purely because of climate change, right? Maybe it was some telephone line or some power line that fell on the ground and it sparked it off. But, we have like drier vegetation. We have more intense and frequent, hurricanes and tropical storms that were in the region a couple, 100 miles away or so that made the winds significantly more strong, and that carried the fire even more than it otherwise would have been. I mean, so many different examples that we could point to of, climate change having a direct impact on the likelihood of events like this happening, and 4% of the broad general national TV news that were specifically talking about this event didn't even mention climate change. I mean, think about that for a second. It's completely fucking insane, okay? So, I mean, again, you feel for the people that are in Maui, in Hawaii. You feel for the people that are in California. And there's also some major fires that are happening right now in Canada as well, in British Columbia, that, is obviously going to cause significant damage. But, I mean, these are the kinds of things that are just going to continue happening and happening and happening at an increasing rate. And I think that, friend of the show, Kyle Kalinske, made a good point on this front, which is that there was a period of time, right? There was a long period of time where it seemed like we were getting reports about climate change, and maybe those reports seemed at the time a lot more intense and serious than what people were actually experiencing in their day-to-day lives, where things seem relatively stable and relatively okay. But now we're getting to the point where there are just like stories about wildfires. I mean, again, I said this before in a previous segment, but I'm in DC, I'm in Washington DC, halfway down the US East Coast, and I was having to they were sending recommendations to my phone that you need to stay inside because the air is toxic because of wildfires in Canada, right? And so people's direct experiences in their day-to-day lives and hearing stories like this constantly, that's starting to track with what we understand about the science of climate change, right? So maybe that's sort of a tiny silver lining on this, and that maybe more and more people are going to be woken up to the reality of what's going on and what needs to be done. But I mean, again, we have a Republican Party that is essentially a death cult on this issue of climate change. I mean, you have guys like Trump who obviously, fully in the pocket of, the fossil fuel industry and wants to decimate, literally take a sledgehammer to the EPA, to, the agency that is responsible for literally regulating the environment with the EPA, and, wants to dismantle any regulations and rules surrounding the extraction and the use of fossil fuels. You have guys like Vivek Ramaswamy in the Republican primary right now who, consistently tweets out this list of what he calls the, core truths of the United States of America, and like literally literally number 3 on that list is that fossil fuels are a requirement for human flourishing, right? Okay, so you have those demented fucks on the right, okay, and how they're trying to, or not trying to address climate change. And then you also have people like, Joe Biden and Joe Manchin on the, Democratic side of that equation that are also, not that much better. They're not worse. They're not equal, but they're also not that much better. Joe Biden approving the Willow Project, right? Touting this historic investment of climate change, which is like, 1% of what we spend on our military budget on an annual basis, allowing his climate legislation to be largely dictated by a literal fossil fuel millionaire coal baron of Joe Manchin in West Virginia. So, we're obviously not even doing remotely close to what we need to be doing on this issue of climate change. And again, we're just going to keep seeing this shit more and more and more. People are going to lose their homes. People are going to lose their lives and their family members. And it's just going to continue getting worse. So sorry to end it on a doomer note, but there you have it.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying